First of all, I just wanted to introduce myself for anybody who doesn't know me, although I think most of you were in my session yesterday. Um, my name is Aaron Magid. I actually started as an open source developer, so I am speaking from both angles actually on this question. I started as an open source developer and then came to the IBMI and had to learn it about 7 years ago. Yeah, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, whatever, somewhere around there. And I also now in my company am largely responsible in many ways for onboarding new developers. So I've had to do it for myself, and I have had to mentor developers in our company to get them onto the IBMI, and I've had to interview developers and try to attract them to work on the IBMI. So hopefully I can share some of my experiences and some of the things that my company has done successfully and unsuccessfully in this regard. And one of the other things that I get to do, one of the reasons why I wanted to give this presentation, is I talk to IBMI shops all day, every day. I do about 50 Zoom meetings a week with IBMI shops. It's not all with different ones. You know, I have repeats during the week, but I talk to a lot of companies. And the first thing that I want to say to everybody here is that if you are concerned about staffing, if you feel like you're either maybe somebody on your team or maybe you is trying to retire or something like that, but you can't because the company can't take it, or if you just feel pinched because there's a ton of work to do on this application and you can't get enough manpower to do it, I hear that every single day. And it's from a different company every day. I hear that exact same concern. So I just want to say you're not alone. If it's any consolation, I know that doesn't make the problem any better. In fact, actually, it makes it worse because you're all fighting over the same talent pool. But it is a very common problem. You're not doing anything wrong. I just want to say that. If you're having this problem, you know, it's not something that you're doing. Now, there are some things that you can do to make it better, and some of the things that I've seen companies do to make it better, and some of the things that my company has done to make it better for us. And so I want to share those with you today. Just a brief thing about me. My general perspective within the IBMI world, my general role is to help companies bring their IBMI forward into modern technologies. A lot of IBMI shops are using lots and lots of modern things. A lot of IBMI shops are taking advantage of new technologies. A lot of them aren't. And one of the things that I have learned is that the perception of the platform is determined based on what it is being used for. And I'll talk about that more later, but that's one of the key points here. And so I am here. Everything that I do is to help IBMI shops use the latest technologies in modern ways, so that the platform can be perceived as the modern platform that it is. Because I also talk to a lot of executives who don't like it. I can say that. That is a very common thing. So quick agenda here, some of the things that we're going to talk about. One, I want to talk about how my company handles this problem, because I think that we've come to a fairly successful model. Now, we're not a fully traditional IBMI shop, but I think that's actually part of the answer. We're going to talk about what developers are looking for, at least what I have heard they're looking for, and what I looked for, and what the people I interview are looking for. That's going to lead us into what companies are looking for, because, quick spoiler, a lot of what developers are looking for is how to make themselves more attractive to companies in the future. We'll briefly touch on why I believe a lot of IBMI shops are struggling to attract young developers. I think what the actual issues are that are leading to that. And then I'm going to try to give you a vision of how you can make this problem better, and how things can change. We'll talk about strategies, we'll talk about tools, and we'll talk about one particular strategy, which is that gradual onboarding at the end. So hopefully what I'll do here is give you guys a model that you can follow, and at least some points that you can look at to make this better, and hopefully protect the investment and the application and the team that you have moving forward. All right. One quick housekeeping thing. before we really jump in here. I am personally a big fan of informal conversational sessions. I'm not really interested in standing up here in front of you guys for an hour and just talking at you about things you may or may not care about. So if you have a question, if you have something you want to share, raise your hand, and I'm always happy to hear it. And if I'm not happy to hear it, like if I need to focus on what I'm talking about, I won't call on you. So don't worry, I'll decide. All right, let's jump in. So let's talk about how my company, Eradani, handles this problem, because we are an IBMI company. We have a substantial IBMI footprint, and we are building applications for IBMI shops. So we have to do a lot of IBMI coding. But we have been tasked, and we started the company a little over 6 years ago. So, we don't have long-term developers working for us. We had to assemble a team, and we've had to continue growing and assembling a team over time. So there are 4 major things that I want to suggest to everybody here in terms of how my company does this. And we're going to break these down and go through them in more detail over the course of the presentation, and the sort of the raw concepts behind them. But just at a high level, in our company, first thing, our entire development environment is using fully modern tooling, right? What I mean by that is we use Git, we are in VS Code, we have Docker-based environments that give them very sophisticated tool sets. We are using AI all over the place. We have open source tooling. We are always trying to use the cutting edge tools around our IBMI and on our IBMI, right? So we are treating the IBMI as a modern platform, using and subject to the same requirements and the same tools as all of the other platforms in our ecosystem. For example, all of our IBMIs are cloud-based. We do not have any physical presence of a machine anywhere. Everything is cloud, right? So we create and destroy IBMIs all the time, right? That's one of the things that we do. We do templates, we do automated deployments, right? We do all that stuff. So that's one piece. Another piece is we are working in a multi-language environment. That's a critical piece when you've got new developers that you're bringing in. I have met in my career, I would say 5 people who are actually experts in both the IBMI and the open source world. And 2 of them work for my company. So they're very rare, this kind of person. And I think probably 2 more of them are speaking at this conference, right? They're very rare, the people who are actually experts in both sides. Most of the people that you go out to try to hire are going to know one or the other, and the vast majority are going to know the open side, not the IBMI side. So one of the things that we do with our new developers is we start them in the open source side. When we hire a new developer, they are doing open source languages on IBMI using open source tooling. So they're using the new tooling, they're using the new languages, and they're doing it on an IBMI, integrating with IBMI. And over time, they then move into the IBMI application. So that's one of the key things that we do. And it works really well with our developers, right? It means that we can hire developers who know whatever they know, right? And then we can bring them into the IBMI, and they end up learning both sides. So that's a key point for what we do. One critical point, we do growth check-ins. One of the things that we do with our developers is we check in with them periodically, and we make sure that they feel like they are growing in a way that they want to, not just the way that we want them to, right? We do not want developers to feel stagnant, because when developers feel stagnant, they leave, right? So we want them to feel like that. But also, a very similar point, we are also not afraid of churn on our team. What I mean by that is developers come, they learn, and they leave. And that's fine. They come, they stay for a couple of years, they learn what they feel like they can learn from us, and when they feel like they can't learn anymore, they move on. We have a talent pipeline, and we are a stage in that pipeline, and the pipeline then leads somewhere else. And that's an important point to think about, which I'll talk about more later. But that's basically I think the 4 points for our company and how we do this. And again, it works very well. We've been able to assemble a team that can actually do this. So that's the key thing that I wanted to say here. I wanted to show you what this looks like, just because I like showing things rather than just talking to slides. This is an example of a real demo application that I use in my presentations. It is built out of the template, the base application template that my company uses, right? So this is a real application. I used it in my AI presentation yesterday. In this environment, I am using VS Code for all of my editing. I've got my RPG here, and I've also got all of my other languages here. I've got my RPG, my command source, all that stuff is up there. And if I scroll down, I've got TypeScript, JavaScript, I've got open source languages in here too, right? So I've got the hybrid multi-language environment, and I'm doing it all in VS Code, right? I have in this environment, and by the way, this is using Code4i and its extensions. That's how I have this RPG in here. I have Git in this environment. If I make a change to this file and I save it, Git is going to show that I have a change to this file, right? It's going to give me the changes that I've done. I am using the Git extension in VS Code. It is normal Git. There is nothing crazy about it. I am using that set of tools. I also have in this environment, and this is also a key point actually, I have in this environment an automated build process. If I hit this button, this package QSys button, it's going to go connect out to a build server, and it's going to go compile my programs and get me back the compiled objects, right? Or compile listings, error messages if anything goes wrong, right? So I have a full environment here. I have automations, I have VS Code, I have Git, I have actually AI assistance. If anybody went to my AI presentation yesterday, you will have seen when I went in here and actually had the AI assistant work with the RPG and make changes to it for me, right? So this development environment together allows me as a developer to come in to this environment knowing absolutely nothing. I can come to this application and I have, critically, an area that I'm comfortable with. I've been writing JavaScript codes for 15 years. I have an area that I am comfortable with. That's the Git and JavaScript side of things. It's the open source side of things. That's what I know, or what I knew before I came to the IBMI. And then I also have the IBMI code. And when I go into the IBMI code, I have a one-click build process, automated build process, right? So I don't need to learn all about create commands and all about library lists and all about the things that I need to understand in order to do a build of an IBMI object. I just hit the button, done. Right? I don't have to have any idea how that's working, right? It's fully automated. So that's a key point there. I never had to go into the 5250. I never had to use anything that I'm not familiar with, right? Build, done. And when I actually work with the code, I have AI assistance. And I did this. I'm not going to wait for the whole demonstration process here because this isn't an AI presentation, but I just want to show you. If I have, for example, what I did in my session yesterday, I said I have this parameter. And I've been tasked with making this is a hard-coded local variable. Can you change the in mode variable so that it is a parameter to the program instead of a local variable, right? I can go in, I give the AI assist what I want it to do, and it's going to go through and it's going to make changes to the program. And then it's actually going to show me the changes that it made and the logic that it used to come up with it, right? So again, stepping back for a second, what this means for me as a developer, let's say that I'm coming to the IBMI and I know nothing about it. I've never even heard of it before, right? Which we have hired people who had never heard of it before. In fact, actually, a lot of the people we've hired have never heard of it until their interview with us, right? I can come in here, I can make changes to RPG using the tools that are familiar to me. I can make actually fairly sophisticated changes to RPG. I can compile and get feedback. I can ask the assistant to explain what's going on in the code without having to have constant oversight from an IBMI engineer who understands things, although I can go to my IBMI team if I have advanced questions and I need to ask something. I'm able to step into the process one tool at a time. right? Eventually, I'm going to need to get into a 5250, right? Because I'm going to have to run this program. But that's fine, right? I didn't have to know the language inside and out. I didn't have to know how to compile it. I didn't have to know all the observational tools. I didn't have to know a proprietary IBM change management system that works totally differently from Git that I've been using since I was in high school, right? Which is going to be a common story if you're hiring a young developer, right? I didn't have to totally change the way that I think. I didn't have to do a totally radically different thing. I just have to know how to open a 5250, set my library list, and call the program. That's it. One second, and then but thank you. And what that means is I can take this one step at a time. I learn the 5250, then eventually I will have to learn more about RPG coding. Eventually I will have to learn more about compiles and those kinds of things. But it's a lot less daunting if I can start my job today without having to be an expert. Go ahead, what's your question? Did you write the automated build? Yes. That's a really good question. So what you need is basically a Git-based change management. You need something that's able to pull your code down to the IBMI and run the compile. This is not a product demo for my company. My company actually provides a product for that, but I'm not going to do a commercial here. If you want to stop by our booth, you're welcome to. But this tool actually I wrote. I'm actually not using my company's product for this because I, as a policy, do not use my company's products in presentations that I do at Common because I don't want them to be commercials. But this tool I wrote. It's fairly simplistic. It doesn't quite cover what you need for an actual environment, but it gets the job done for a lot of applications. And also, by the way, Code4i can do compiles of programs remotely. Again, not fully there on an automated build tool, but it can get you started. It can actually get you to a place where you get this part of the benefit. And then from there, there are vendors who can help you, including mine, but not a commercial. But yeah, I actually wrote this, and actually I can show you here. Let's see, where is this? It's in my application. There's remote build. There's my shell script. This is what it does. The main blind spot of this actually is what it does is it zips up the entire RPG source directory and then runs a full build of everything basically. So it's not actually doesn't actually know which object I modified, which is why you wouldn't want to use this script for a real IBMI application because you'd be waiting 10 hours for your build. But you could make it more intelligent. Use Git to figure out which object is changed and do things like that. But this is at a conceptual level. This is how we do it, and it again it works very well. And again, you don't have to adopt this entire model all at once, right? Because I also want to be sensitive to, it also means that the IBMI team has to learn all these new things. If you want to make an environment that's inviting to young developers, that means that your shop has to change the way that it's doing things most likely. So, there's a balancing act there. But even if what you have is VS Code, Git, an AI assistance and not automated builds, okay, I as a developer, I come in, I have to learn the 5250 and I have to learn your change management system. It's more. You're asking me to do a lot more actually because it's very different working with an IBMI change management system versus working with Git. And there's a lot of things you can't do, and there's a lot of things that that I would want to be able to do. But then I'm learning 2 things instead of 4 or 5, right? It's still better. And the key idea here that I want to push is create an environment that's friendly for the developers. That's one of the main points. You create that environment so that they can go in one step at a time, because otherwise you're going to interview them and you're going to say, or you're going to hire them, you're going to say, here's what our environment looks like. And they're going to say, I don't understand any of this, right? And that's not a comfortable place to bring in a brand new hire, right? Like I know literally nothing about what's happening in this company. That's hard. So that's one of the main things that I want to push there. One of the other pieces here, this is a little more advanced, but we also use Dockerized environments. That's a very fancy way of saying, actually, I don't know if there's a simpler way to say it, that we use Docker for our development environments. We use containers for our environments. What that means is our PCs have a fully configured environment for IBMI development right out of the gate. So our developers don't need to go figure out what tools they need. They don't need to like go get a file transfer tool and get a 5250 emulator or whatever. They don't have to do any of that. They don't have to set up their connections or figure out how to get their code on there and get RDI or whatever we're using. They just download, they clone the application from Git. It comes down with the configuration for their environment. When they pull up VS Code says, I need this software, this software, this software, and this software, and it just installs it all, gets it set up. Right, so whatever they need for their project, it's just in there. Again, we're trying to make that easier. One thing that we did, I was very proud of it in our company. This happened like probably 4 or 5 years ago. We had a developer who we brought on. It was one of the first times that we did this. And he was a guy who had never heard of an IBMI before. And he started working on one of our API applications on an IBMI. So he was connecting to an IBMI in VS Code every single day and working on it and using it for his applications. And about 2 weeks after we hired him, he sent me a message. He said, "This is awesome. When am I going to get to see an IBMI?" And I was like, you've been on it the entire time, right? And that was eye-opening for me when that happened, because what it meant is this guy who had never heard of it before, so much so that he couldn't even recognize that he was on one. He thought he was on a Linux machine. He had no idea no idea, right? And it wasn't a problem. And so he was able to get up to speed and then gradually learn the rest of the tools. He was able to make it 2 weeks. He would have gone longer if I hadn't told him, and not realizing that he was even on the machine. So again, that's one of the key points that I want to make here. You make an inviting environment for the developers that is familiar to them. And I know that's hard because that puts all the work on you, right? If your company's not using Git and you're not using VS Code and you're not familiar with those things, that means you got to learn all those things. But yeah, that's what it means. But that's what I've seen work. Yeah, go ahead. That is a really good question. Yeah, it depends on how far you go. It's a great question. The biggest blind spot for these tools right now is IBMI screens. They've managed to actually get pretty much everything else, in my experience. The modern build tools can do, they can do Git-based builds. They can do automated deployments. There are automated testing frameworks. There are monitoring frameworks. There are things that can do just about everything. I have not seen a good answer to IBMI screens yet. But and in most applications, you don't go all the way. Like our developers, we still want them to learn them. Great question, and it's plaguing a lot of companies. So the answer is that this is not the end of the process. This is the beginning. So meaning with our developers, we bring them into this environment, we make it inviting, and then we get them into the IBMI environment gradually. What this allows us to do is not keep them out of the IBMI. It's not what we want to do, right? One way to use this technology is to say, actually, this has traditionally been the strategy in IBMI companies, right? I have an IBMI team and I have a .NET team. The .NET guys know nothing about the IBMI and they have no interest in the IBMI and they are often openly hostile toward the IBMI, right? I see that I hear the chuckles. I see it all the time. Again, you're not alone. I actually have a slide in my other presentations that's dedicated to this because I see it so often, right? So that's the old strategy. I'm going to have 2 different teams, and they're not going to talk to each other. That's not what we're talking about. What we're doing here is we're saying, I'm giving the new developers a landing pad that is familiar to them, that gives them what they need to start being productive. There will be things they can't do using these tools, like work with screens. Can't do it, sorry, right? Meaning like with this tools, with these tools, like with VS Code and with the testing tools that are in here, right? Screens are one of those things, right? IBMI screens. They're going to have to get to the IBMI. But with this, they've got a safe zone, basically, where they are able to be productive on day one. They're able to provide value to the company. They're able to start learning, and they have something that they can do that is familiar. And then they can step out and they can work on the IBMI. If your job is 100% unfamiliar, it is extremely uncomfortable. If your job is 20% unfamiliar, it's a really positive challenge. It actually can be better than it being fully familiar, right? There's a sweet spot there, and for every person it's different. But that's what we're trying to do. We want to give them that landing zone. Yeah, go ahead. That's a good question. I personally haven't. Good question, though. Sorry, short answer. Yeah, cool. Yeah, yeah. That's a great question. We don't, but you certainly could, right? I mean, it's again, it's all about having that balance of technologies. It's all about having that balance of technologies so that you can use, so that they can have that, a gradual start. You have a question? Oh, yeah. Sorry. The question is, do we introduce our developers to iNav as opposed to just jumping directly into the screens? And what I said is our particular decision was no, but it doesn't have to be. You all can do this in different ways. The fundamental idea here is, again, we want to give an environment. We want to set up the job for the young developers so that you're hitting that sweet spot of, again, each person is different, but there's some familiarity, some certainty, and there's some unfamiliarity. Because what that does for a person psychologically is it gives them, if they need the confidence boost, they can go back to the area that they know, right? They can retreat back into their sort of, their familiar zone. And what happens then is the unfamiliar things become, like I said, a positive challenge, an inspiring positive thing, a growth opportunity, rather than this scary thing that, your entire day is this brutal, incredibly difficult thing, right? So that's one of the key points. Now, one of the reasons why I wanted to show all this stuff is that most IBM shops that I work with can't provide that because they don't have that, right? There's just nothing there. Give me one more, and then we gotta move on. Yeah, that's a good question. I am actually focused more on people who have a couple of years of experience, but it also depends on what you were doing in college. Like when I was in college, I was building projects in Git and JavaScript, and even without work experience, I was already using those tools. Not everybody does that, but my experience has been that most of the people that I go to hire, including the people who are fresh out of college, in college they were learning things, right? If you're studying computer science, they're most universities. There are some actually. It's kind of cool that they're doing it, but most universities unfortunately do not have an IBMI track, right? And so because of that, they're if you go into the programming classes, like my computer science program, we were learning Git and we were learning Java. That was what they had us learn. I took a machine learning class and we were learning Python, and I said that's nice. You know, they didn't. I didn't hear the term IBMI in my days in college at all, right? I mean, that's just how it was. I mean, again, I know that there are some places that are doing it, and that's awesome. But yeah. So actually, good segue. In here, let's just establish what's going on here. Not that any of you need to actually see this slide. I just wanted to have it in the presentation as notes. But there is one point that I think is important that we might not know, and that's the top one. The average tenure for a software developer in the industry is 2.8 years, right? That's an important point. I just want to put this out here, right? Meaning it's not 30 years. Now, obviously, we're all aware, right, that it's getting harder and harder to staff for these applications. And for anyone who's not aware, right, the knowledge transfer window is very important and is closing, right? We need to be able to get our new developers up to speed while the knowledge is still present in the application. These AI documentation tools that are coming out are very cool. They're very powerful in what they're able to figure out in an application. But if you lose your domain knowledge, if you lose that person who knows everything, is working on the application for 40 years, you're in a tough position. And by the way, if any of you have lost that person, I can tell you, you're not alone. I talk to people almost every week where the meeting starts with, we lost our IBM guy retired, right? And now we have no idea how the system works, right? And I work with them as they spend the next few years trying frantically to rebuild that knowledge base, and it's hard. So we want to make sure that we're dealing with this right now. There may be people in this room who are also on the other side of that, where they want to get out but can't, right? Because of this exact problem. I know people who are basically trapped because they want to retire, and they said, I'm going to retire in January. Well, I guess I'll retire in June. Okay, I'll retire next year. Okay, I'll retire the year after that, right? The company keeps coming back to them and begging them to stay another 6 months because they can't solve this problem, right? And I feel for them. So again, if you're feeling this problem, just know you're not alone. Again, it is very, very common. That's why I'm doing a presentation on it. So let's talk a little bit about what developers want, because I think that this is an important point when you're trying to attract developers. Obviously, this is not universal, but this has been my observation. And that's everything that I say in here, I just want to say, is going to be my observation in my work here. What I have seen is that primarily developers are interested in having an experience where they can learn and grow, where they can prepare for their next job, and where they have some degree of familiarity. I think it's something that we all want, right? We all want to have at least some level of, I know what's going on here, I know what I'm doing, right? You feel safe when you can do that. So we want to have some of that. But the key thing that I want to point out, because I think that it might be different for a lot of IBM shops, is that developers are generally not coming to companies and saying, yes, I'm going to work for you for the next 40 years, and then I expect a pension, and I'm going to retire from your company, right? That is not how developers are thinking about it these days. One of the key points here in looking at this is, I like to use Amazon as an example. When I was in college, I was applying to companies like Amazon, or actually I didn't apply to Amazon. And the reason was I read that they have a 4% one-year retention rate on developers. 4%. 96% of the developers who go to work at Amazon are not there the next year, right? The question is, first of all, why is that happening? And second of all, if that's happening, why are developers still applying and going there, right? One of the reasons that's given for why they have such a low retention rate is that they burn people out. It's just a really, really intense environment. But if that's the case, why is it that developers are still applying there? Why is it that they're applying to an environment where they're going to have to work 90 hours a week and just totally burn themselves out over the course of their first year? And the answer is, if you have Amazon on your resume, you can work literally anywhere, right? You go out, you flash that resume that says Amazon on it, done, right? You're in. People don't want to work at Amazon. They want to have worked at Amazon, right? Because of the growth opportunity that's there. That's why the developers are going there, at least I believe. And again, one of the attitudes that I think we need to adopt in the IBM community is you want to be that. Amazon is fully not expecting to keep those developers. They have no problem with it, right? It's totally fine. They know that they're going to bring on developers, and then those developers are often going to go work for their competitors. Fine. Or to other companies. They're going to go off, go off to Microsoft and to Google and whatever. They're going to go off wherever they're going to go, and it's fine, right? And that's one of the key points that I want to make here. Developers are looking for those learning opportunities. If they feel like your company is not a place where they can learn and grow, or if they feel like the only thing that they have an opportunity to learn at your company is a platform that unfortunately they perceive as old, they're not going to be interested, right? Because they're looking at your company and they're saying, okay, and how is this preparing me for the next job? So what's going through their head is they're saying, okay, so I'm going to add RPG to my resume. And while that does give you a leg up in the IBM world, if you're thinking about Google and Amazon and those kinds of companies, they're sitting there going, I'm not learning anything that I want here. I'm not learning something that's going to help me in my career growth. And I think that's a key shift to understand. They are not intending to take over your development environment and work there for 40 years. That's not what they're doing. right? And that's why this happens, right? If they were going to stay there for 40 years, then they would be thinking about salary and benefits and those kinds of things, right? They'd be thinking about culture and, how nice is it to work here, right? But they're looking at growth. And that's one of the key points. And that's one of the reasons why we have to adopt as many of these technologies as we can, so that they not only so that it's familiar, but so that they actually feel like they have the opportunity to grow in the direction that they want. And what that looks like is bringing in modern tools in modern ways, right? That means using Git. That means using automated deployments, continuous integration, and continuous deployment models, right? Which are, hard to set up, but that means using VS Code. That means AI assistance. That means going out and using open source code and going out and using cutting edge technologies, right? One of the things that we do with our developers, like I mentioned, is we have a growth check-in. We say, what is it that you want to be doing? I have a developer who works on my team who, when we brought him on, we asked him, what do you want to do? He's totally fresh, young guy. His profile picture has braces on. This guy is like, he came into the team. He said, I want to work on AI. And now he's the head of all of our AI work. He spent his entire time working on these AI tools. And as the AI tools have grown, we said, go do it. We want to do AI stuff. Go figure it out. Right? We had no product for it yet. We had no actual project for it. We just said, go do it. That's what you want to learn. Go do it and figure out how to use it on our application. Right? But also, you're going to be learning the IBMI, by the way. You have to do that stuff too. Right? And now we have AI tools for IBMI, largely because of the work that he did. Right? And we have that story over and over and over again in our developers. We have another guy who did our infrastructure. He came in, he said, I want to do Kubernetes. Okay, set it up. I'd love to have that, right? So a lot of it is about saying, yes, you want to grow in this way. And I'm fully aware that these guys are going to leave at some point. I want to hang on to them as long as I possibly can. But I know they are going to leave at some point when they feel like they don't learn anything anymore. And when they do, I will give them a very polite send-off and help them find their next job and ask them to help me find a replacement. And we'll bring in another person and we'll go through the same thing. That's what we're going to do, right? So again, it's a really critical piece here. Another piece of this environment is real-time development environments. That means things like linters, code scans, real-time compiles of your applications, those kinds of things, automated builds, right? These are the things that allow developers. This is actually more a training tool. These things are actually very important. If I have an ability to click a button in my environment that's going to build everything and then show me the output, where I don't have to learn a whole interface to figure out how to do that, that means that as I'm writing the code, I can hit that button, I can see the output, right? So as I'm learning the IBMI, it's also going to make it easier for me, right? Because I type something, hit the button, see the output. Type something, hit the button, see the output. I'm not going through a long process or going through tools I don't know to try to get the output that I need. Right, and that gets us into, I think that's what developers are looking for, right? I think really if you boil it down is they want to be ready for their next job, right? And so I think that takes us into a little bit about, what is it that companies are looking for? I don't really want to spend too much time on this because, I don't think we've largely talked about this. But really, it's just important to understand that other companies, what they're looking for is they're looking for people who can take on a project and use modern technologies, use the latest tools to improve a process or an application at the company, right? Most of them are looking for that kind of person who is going to be an independent problem solver and work on actively improving something. So again, that's what's leading these developers to say, I want to learn Kubernetes. I want to learn AI. Why? Because then when I go and I apply to the next company, they're going to say, great, take over our AI process, right? Go lead our AI strategy. That's what's going to happen for that developer. So that's what they're looking for. They're also going to be working in these kinds of iterative environments, right? With tools like Git. They're going to be using those tools. generally speaking, and this may be a somewhat, I know I said I would say some provocative statements, but generally speaking, basically every company that I have seen outside of the IBMI world is using Git. It's just, that's the standard. I haven't really seen a lot of companies outside of the IBMI world that are not using it, right? So that means that if I'm a developer and I'm coming to an IBMI company and they're not using Git, then that means that their proprietary change management system, whatever they're using, that is not a transferable skill, right? I mean, if I go to another IBMI shop, it is, maybe. But even then, there's actually a whole market, so I may or may not actually be able to use that tool and those skills in another shop. But if I go outside the IBMI world, it's certainly not a transferable skill because everybody else is on Git. So that's also a critical piece here. And again, right, they're going to be working with, right, the companies are going to be looking for developers who can take a project and actually improve a process. So another thing that we're doing, right, is if you bring in a developer and they get to own your AI strategy, for example, because you haven't done it yet, and it's just like, okay, great, go do it, right? Or they own your Git setup. That's something that they can put on their resume, and that's going to be attractive to them. It gives them an opportunity to lead and grow, which is going to help them for their next job, right? So again, I think the key point here is developers are preparing for their next job, and if you keep that in mind, that's, I think, going to help you out a lot. Let's talk about why I've seen companies struggle. Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Right. Right. If you correct me if I'm not restating this correctly, right? But if you create a friendly environment for them where they're able to explore it at their own pace, then they actually might be more likely to explore it than if you are trying to, force them into it. And the way that you create that environment is you make sure that they are able to bring value to the company, they're able to do their job to a satisfactory level without learning the IBMI yet, right? So for example, we'll bring on developers and we'll put them on API projects. Why? Because the APIs are written in JavaScript. So they get to use Git, JavaScript, VS Code, AI assistants, all the tools that they're used to using. The API is calling IBMI operations, right? And it uses the IBMI in the background, but they can get through a day without actually working on the IBMI when they first start. Then eventually we say, okay, now you got to actually figure out how to work with the IBMI, right? That's your next step. And we don't even have to say it usually. They will naturally go into it because they're using an API. And for most developers, if you're building a system and you're tightly integrating with a system that's a black box, most developers I know will have this itch to go understand what's in that black box, right? And so they go in and they figure it out, right? I usually end up getting questions pretty quickly about how do I get in? How do I do this? I was trying to get through this menu and I have no idea where I am or what's going on, right? I get those kinds of things. I get screenshots of 5250 sent to me with and I'm like, where are you? How did you even, what did you do? But it's all positive, right? Because I used to do that kind of thing, and it's also a reason why we use cloud machines is if you blow up the machine, we just copy it, create a new one. But that's easier for us because we're a software vendor. We don't actually have production data on there. Yeah, go ahead. Right. 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 Yeah, I think you're totally right. And I think there's actually also a personality point there. That if you're an IBMI shop, especially if you're the kind that is in the situation where you're on the verge of losing your IBMI person, you actually need to bring on someone who will own the system. That's one of the things that you're looking for. You're not just looking for a developer, actually, right? IBMI developers go way beyond what developers in other companies do in terms of their level of ownership and knowledge of the applications. I regularly work with IBM companies where the developers on the IBM know how the business operates better than the executives do. I have actually had conversations where that's evident, right? Because the IBM developers are actually encoding the business process into the application all day long. They understand all the business rules. If you've been doing it for 40 years, you know it way better than, whatever leader was brought in a couple of years ago, right? And so that means if you're trying to replace that, you're not just looking for an RPG developer. You're looking for someone who's going to own the application. And so in that case, bringing in someone who is a self-starter and will learn it on their own and will go out and figure it out, that's actually a really important skill set, because again, you're looking for that leader who's actually going to own it. In plenty of other cases, right? I mean, you're looking for a different persona, but that's one of the things that I think IBM shops need. In terms of what creates a problem here, it's really the flip side of what we've been talking about, right? We talked about Git. What's the flip side of that? That's non-standard version control tools, or none at all, right? If you have a proprietary change management system that is not working the way that all the other companies outside of the IBM are working, then if I'm coming from outside of the IBM, it's foreign to me, right? And, honestly, I've seen a lot of the tools, and Git has capabilities that go well beyond what I've seen in any tool on the IBM. So that also means that it's not just that it's not familiar to me. There are things that I want to do that I can't do, right? So it's a really important point here, right? If we have non-standard controls or none at all, that's going to be something that's going to create a problem for me as a developer. It also dramatically raises the probability of me breaking something, which is also not a comfortable thing to be doing within a company, although that's more after you get hired. Also, the tooling that we're using, right? If you show me the development, if I'm a brand new developer, you're trying to bring me into the company, and I say, okay, how do I get in and work with the code? And you bring up a 5250 and you show me PDM, right? It's going to be hard for me to swallow, right? Because I'm used to VS Code, right? That's going to be tough, right? So that's another key piece, right? Is having access to these technologies, right? And not having access to those technologies, I think, is one of the big things that scares developers away. And again, it also comes down to the languages, right? It's not so much that the presence of RPG will push away a young developer. It's that the exclusivity of RPG will push away a young developer, right? If that's the only thing that's available, that's going to create a problem. If everything is done in RPG, and I'm just going to take a side note. Actually, it's not a side note. I actually have a whole section in here. That using RPG for everything, that's not really an appropriate use of RPG. What do I mean by that? I mean, in a modern application, in a modern IBM application, you have to do core logic processing, you have to do batch processing, you have to work with your database, you have to build the screens. That's all very appropriate for RPG. That's what it was designed to do. It does a great job at it, and it is blazing fast. It is phenomenal. I was talking, actually, had a meeting with one of my customers here yesterday, where we were talking about, he's an open source guy. We were talking about how it is insane that IBM shops are able to run production workloads on 1.5 cores. Or 1 core. Like, that's ridiculous. You go to a Windows shop and you're running 15 servers that are each 4 core, and there's nobody is that efficient. Totally reasonable way to use RPG. I said this in my presentation yesterday. If you're calling APIs, what I have typically seen with RPG is that when all is said and done, including authentication, JSON parsing, request structuring and handling, I said authentication, right? The encryption, all the stuff that you have to do to actually call an API effectively, especially ones that are multi-step. What I usually see is that it takes approximately 300 times as much code in RPG to do that as it takes in a language like JavaScript. Because JavaScript was designed for the internet. It was actually designed to be the programming language of the web. So that's what it does really, 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 really well, right? So again, what I would have to do hundreds of lines of code, if I come into the shop and I say, great, I need to call an API, can I use my 1 line of code tool that I like using in JavaScript? I use Axios, and 1 line of code does that entire process for me. And you say, no, here's what it looks like. and I go into PDM and I have to page through several screens of code just to see one API call, I'm going to look at that and I'm going to go, why on earth am I doing this, right? I'm doing something that's harder needlessly, right? So this is one of the key points that I said I was going to say provocative things and potentially make some enemies, but this is one of the most important things that I say. I try to fit it into every presentation that I do, regardless of what the topic is, right? That we need to use the right tool for the job. That's a big piece of this, right? You don't just want to, bring in open source technologies just to bring them in, right? Bring them in because they're actually the right tool to use for what you're doing. If you're actually implementing AI systems, you should be bringing in Python. If you are implementing web-based integrations, you should be bringing in JavaScript on your IBM I. It does a great job with it, right? And the side effect of bringing those in is that you'll be able to bring in young developers and put them on those technologies, and they will be able to actually use it. A couple of other things here that we talk about in terms of a modern stack. Let's look at what does this look like, right? So I'm talking about the technologies that we want to bring in. I'm talking about the tools that we want to use and the processes that we need in place. Let's talk about what does this stack look like when you actually use it. One is making sure that we have support for VS Code. That has become the de facto editor for pretty much everybody. It's not everybody, but it is wildly popular. And the editors that aren't VS Code look like it. So if you're using VS Code, pretty much everybody's going to know it. Even if they're not exactly familiar with it, it's going to be good enough. Having AI assistance is going to help you as you work with the technology. Like I showed you before, I can make a simple change to an RPG program without having to actually understand the language. That means that I can get my feet wet as a developer without having to be an expert. I can get in gradually. It means having APIs in your system, right? It means using these modern architectures, right? So where we have applications that are FTPing, files around over, unsecured FTP, right? We want to start getting to architectures that are more modern, right? Where we're using messaging systems like Kafka, we're using APIs, we're using these kinds of technologies because those are also the things that are going to attract developers, right? If I'm a developer, a perfectly valid topic that I may want to learn about is Kafka. If you have it in your company, that's a really good point for me as a developer because I can come in and I can say, this is an opportunity for me to learn about this technology, right? And also, it's just fun to work with, honestly. It's pretty cool. I'm going to actually skip down to the bottom row. Open source, right? Using open source technologies will give your developers that place where they can work with something that can provide value to you on day one without having to learn RPG first, right? It's going to be really valuable. If they have that, I promise you, they will be more open to learning RPG, not less, because they will actually have something that they can do right now. They can get in, they can start providing value, they can feel like they're doing their job. And then they can also get into RPG. Automated processes, that's another piece of it, right? The more automated a process is, the less I need to know to get started working with it, right? So again, you can see everything that I'm saying. I'm talking about creating a familiar environment where we're flattening out the learning curve for developers so that they can take it at their own pace. The last two here, I saved these for last on the right side because these, in my experience, are pretty rare in most of the IBM shops that I work with. But these are two suggested topics for you guys if you want to look at technologies that might be a good thing to kind of start getting into in your applications that will be interesting to younger developers who are trying to build their careers and their skill sets. One is observability platforms. Observability platforms like Grafana, like DataDog, like Splunk, those kinds of things, especially mid-level developers that I work with are often interested in those kinds of things because companies need them. Once a company grows to a certain scale, we need to be able to see what's going on in the application. And this also gives a very powerful environment where they can work with tools that require them to get into the IBM I and actually use it, right? So I've found that this is a good place to bring developers into. It's also something that gives them very quick feedback. You build an RPG program where you outfit an existing RPG program with metrics collection. That's tracking things like how much resource it's using or how many times it's been called, things like that. And that immediately shows up in your dashboard, right? So you're giving them direct, immediate feedback to what they're working on. Another piece is automated testing. Getting testing tools in there is also a very important part of the feedback loop for a developer, right? Just like the automated builds, if I have a code change and then I do an automated build, that is going to basically give me immediate feedback on what I've coded. And if I have testing, then that just extends that, right? After I've done my build, I can then push the program out and I can see if I did it right. Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm. You mean in these observability platforms, or? Hmm. Yeah. So yeah, it's a good question. So we use these observability platforms in our company. What we have is the logging system in the JavaScript, and also actually we do it in the RPG too. Um, the the observability system is hooked up so that the JavaScript emits events basically on various things, whether it's system errors, whatever's going on. And that observability platform can also alert us if it loses contact or doesn't get any data for a while. So that basically allows us to tell, even in the case of a hard crash, we can tell if something is wrong there. But yeah, it's a good question. And it basically, again, it lets us see what's going on in the system and really, I mean, I do a whole session on monitoring, which I'm not doing at this common, but like, yeah, it's a whole subject in and of itself. Yeah. And again, I mean, one of the main reasons why I bring it up is if you bring on a developer and you say, hey, I want you to set up monitoring for us, that's going to be your job, right? You do monitoring. Great. Go set that up. And by the way, you're going to have to update our RPG programs so that they're monitorable. And that's going to require you to get into the code, right? Day one, they don't have to. Day one, they're in Grafana, right? Day two, they're starting to modify RPG, right? Or month two, whatever, right? And again, that's really the strategy here. I just wanted to, one last thing here, and we're out of time. I wanted to show everybody what this looks like, just a really quick thing here, because I know I mentioned earlier that this application, I have code for various different things in this project. I just wanted to show you all in here, this goes farther than just the tooling. The actual application has been outfitted with this strategy, right? So all of my RPG is in Git. Everything is in VS Code. I have a Dockerized environment. I'm using all of these tools. I have a one-click compile button so that it's easy for me, but also the actual way we're building the application is using multiple languages, right? It's not, we don't just have open source there for the sake of having open source there. We don't just have monitoring there for the sake of having monitoring there. We're actually picking things that are interesting topics that we actually need in our application. So for example, this particular system, this confirm program, I believe what it does, actually, sorry, I don't want to do this one. I don't think I actually have the code for this one. Let's do this guy. So this call API program, this is an RPG program that sends out a message to an open source program that then talks to an LLM through an API call. That's what it does. And so what I've got here is in my VS Code, I've got my call API program right here. So I've got my RPG, and that's great. I've got some command source for that, and that's great. And then if I jump down and I look at, let's see, commands, demo, API, here we go. This is the open source code that gets called by that RPG, right? And what it's doing, this is all TypeScript code. It's going in, it's grabbing my data, setting up a prompt for, I think it's Claude that it's using. This is doing sentiment analysis. This is what I showed in my AI presentation yesterday. So it's going to make the call to Claude, grab the data back, extract the Claude's rating of the user's statement on a scale of 1 to 10 out of the message that came back from Claude, and then it's going to send that back to the RPG program, right? So working with this code, I am not separated from the RPG. I have to actually work with it in order to do this integration. But as a TypeScript developer, this environment that we're looking at, what's on my screen right now, is just VS Code, Git, TypeScript, Docker, and AI assistance. It is everything that I would expect in a company that doesn't even have an IBM I. This is a totally familiar place for me. But at the end of this code, it talks to an RPG program. So there must be something in here. I've got that extra sort of, the next step. And the RPG program is part of the integration. So again, bringing that all together, right? In doing this, what I have is an environment where I am, as a developer, I have a familiar environment that I can work with. I have a good mix of the technologies I know with the IBM I technologies. I can grow into it at my own pace. And I can see how I am developing skills that are going to help me in the future, right? And in doing that, we've got that balance of that sweet spot, I believe, of familiarity and growth, right? And this is how we do this for our developers, right? Going back here, I just wanted to end on this note here with my how we do things, right? When we do this with our developers, oh, now it's going to go away. When we do this with our developers, right, we set up that environment that does things the way that they want to do them, right, that gives them access to the tools that they are used to working with so that it's not an unfamiliar environment when they get started. We give them the multi-language environment so that they can work they can provide value, feel like they're doing their job in the technologies they know, and then move into the IBM I technologies. And we check in with them because we recognize openly with them, you're not going to stay here forever, and that's fine. Let's accept that, take advantage of what we have here while we have it, and we're going to help you grow, and you're going to learn the IBM I stuff. So I hope that's useful. I hope it gives you guys something that you can actually work with. And thank you all for coming.